Welcome back to Uncovered. Today I am joined by Ally Cat, co-founder and director of Polesphere, previous owner of Australia's pole dancing magazine, and the author of A Brief History of Pole Dance. Welcome to the podcast, Ally.
Thanks for having me, Steph.
I'm so excited to actually be uncovering the history of Australian pole dancing. I have your book here, actually, that you wrote.
Have you read it? Have you
Yes.
actually read it? It's so good. I was going over it this morning just to kind of relive some of the best moments, and I'm so happy that it exists.
So am I. And this stumbled across my desk because one of my previous instructors brought it in because I started getting a collection of Australian pole dancing magazines when I took over the studio. And I had a couple of other resources, and she had this book, and she's like, do you want me to bring the book in so people can see it? And I'm like, yep. So it's sat in our studio now, and she sort of just left it there. Thank you, Beck. And it worked out really well because now that we're talking today, I get to actually uncover it with the person who wrote it. So I'm super excited.
Well, if I can just clarify for anyone who hasn't read the book, I did write some of it, but a large portion of it was written by contributors. So I guess I compiled it, and I had a lot to do with creating the timelines and putting it all together. But there was a huge number of contributors who told their stories, which was really exciting for me to be part of that process.
Yeah, I can imagine. And the first thing that springs to mind is did you discover anything that you didn't know when you were doing this?
Yes, especially the early days stuff, because I mean, I was around from the early days, but everyone's experience was a little bit more fractured at that stage because we didn't have Instagram and a lot of that social media stuff that kind of brings everyone together. So back in those days, I sort of knew what was going on in New South Wales, kind of I knew there was some pole dancing up there. I kind of knew that there was the Miss Pole Dance competition going on up there when it first happened in 2005. I sort of heard these things, but my experience of the early days was very based in Victoria and the people around me. And because I didn't go to Pole Divas, which was the very first studio. So technically it was the very first studio, but I was learning from a group called Pole Stars, who didn't make it in my list of very first studios only because they would put poles into a function room or something in different venues. They didn't have kind of a purpose-built studio, so I didn't classify them as one of the first studios, but they were around at the very, very early days. So I was learning pole from them. I had very little to do with Pole Divas. So when I connected a lot with Canetta about the early days, I found out lots of really exciting and interesting stuff about that because I'm really in awe of the people who were the front runners of the industry, and the people who were the innovators, and they actually made the shit happen. And Canetta being the main one from Victoria. Obviously Bobby from New South Wales. And there were a few, and I'm really happy that I was able to publish some of their stories in the book.
Yeah, I did love that actually about it when I was going through and I was reading it. I'm like, oh, this one is actually written by Bobby and this one's actually written by this person. And I think that's great to just bring the differences together of our history. But one thing when reading the book was I noticed that you learnt your first pole trick in 1996. Yeah. And you believe it was a fireman, but you don't know if it had that name at that time. What did this, I assume, and I know from reading it, that this was learnt in a strip club, but what did pole look like at that point in time?
Well, again, I can talk about what it looked like in Victoria because in New South Wales, it looked very different. I mean, my experience in the 90s was I was a stripper at Goldfingers when I was 18. And Pole, I mean, there was not really any pole industry to speak of at all. The only thing was there was a pole in the on the main stage, and the girls who would go on the main stage would occasionally bust out a spin or something, or like a little climb, or people weren't inverting much. You'd occasionally see an invert. You'd occasionally see like a back crucifix. I knew one or two girls who would do like a, you know, like a layback back crucifix.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is a back crucifix? So,
yeah,
we
language.
call it a layback. Yeah,
I mean,
I know so many different things.
It's and language is such an interesting interesting element of the history of pole, because you'll find a lot of the lower level stuff have, you know, 20 different names, because they were all sort of being done at different parts of the world under different sort of like early studios or early teachers or whatever who kind of named something that they saw as their own thing. So yeah, there's these kind of like tree branches where you sort of know where someone learnt something based on what they call it.
Yes.
Like, where is it? Like, I think it's an inside leg hang is like a Gemini, but I always learnt that as an angel, and I think sometimes people call it a Scorpio, and it's anyway, there's this.
One thing I would love to see is the pole world actually get more consistent with their names. Like, if we could do anything as an industry, let's create some labels. But like you said, it's interesting because you can actually tie people back if you know enough to where they started based on the language they use.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But going back to the club, so there were a few girls who knew how to do a spin, and that was really kind of all the industry was. It was just basically strip clubs and poles at strip clubs, and girls doing whatever it was that they could do on that pole. And I always found it fascinating because I've always had a love for gymnastics and anything sort of flippy and exciting. So, you know, spinning around a pole kind of fit into that category. So, of course, I really wanted to learn a spin as soon as I could. And, you know, and one of the girls just taught me how to do a spin. And so, you know, I think it was a fireman spin. Whatever it was definitely a very basic spin. So I kind of knew how to fall into, oh, by the way, it was all static poles in Victoria. The spinning poles, the spinning poles were, I think, a bit of a New South Wales situation. And from what I've read of Bobby's memoirs, they might have existed in Japan. There might have been rotating poles in Japan. And then I think she had a bit of a hand in bringing spinning poles to New South Wales. But in Melbourne, there was no such thing as spinning poles until the first time I experienced a spinning pole would have been about 2007, maybe. And that was I was a showgirl, and I would go around to different venues, and they'd put in a spinning pole, and I had no idea of the mechanics of a spinning pole. And I was in the middle of a show, and I went into this like head first cradle spin into on a spinning pole, and just like my whole body's stuck in this spin, and I'm getting like closer and closer to the pole because I'm freaking out. Like there's this audience watching me, and as I get closer to the pole, it just spins faster and faster and faster. So I had to just kind of, you know, release everything and just like touch myself in a way that just looked like it was all supposed to happen that way. But it was, it was definitely not something that existed in Victoria until, a little bit later on. But earlier in Sydney, that's why a lot of the Sydney girls are very spin pole focused.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Brisbane seems to be much more of a static environment, but Sydney was definitely much heavier in the spin. So when did you actually start learning pole dancing as pole dancing?
Yeah, good question. So, I took a big break from dancing until about 2003. I was in a relationship, came out of a relationship, and I was like, I'm going to get back into that because that was really fun. And around that time, so that's when I started work as a showgirl, and around that time was the very early phases of pole stars and pole divas. I think actually it was technically beginning of 2005 was when they officially started teaching, but because I was back on the circuit and back kind of on the pole, and there was a dancer who I would see around called Venus, who was just unbelievable on the pole. Like I mean, she was doing things honestly that I don't think other people were doing until a few years later. Like I swear, I thought I saw her like hands. She was definitely doing like shoulder mounts into Supermans and stuff like that in like 2006 or something like that, which was was really groundbreaking in those days. And I think she created the first syllabus at Divas. So it was very on my radar when I would see her around and how amazing she was. I was like, I have to learn more. And I mean, through the around the traps, I sort of got word that there were classes starting up. So that's when I first started with pole stars, and I just did a beginner. It was like a beginner 8-week course or 6-week course or something, and that's all I did for. I think it was maybe 4 years or so, because I got a pole in my house and I was just self-taught. So at that point, like no Instagram or anything like that. All it was videos on YouTube and just what I was seeing around the circuit, and mostly like Venus and stuff like that. Like I was trying to mimic what I was seeing her do. And that was just a pole in my living room. And you know, was the Wild West back then.
Yeah, I know. And I'm looking at the timeline here, and like 2004, Bobby releases a Pole Grooves DVD.
Yes.
So like, and I mean, back in those days, probably workout DVDs and videos were a huge thing. That was 2004.
Yeah. And I think there were a couple
crazy.
from overseas. So I think there was Pantera's DVDs, and I think maybe Sheila Kelly, S Factor.
Yes.
And maybe Carmen Electra. I'm not sure. There was 2 or 3.
She did definitely have some DVD. I remember Carmen Electra having some DVD at one point, because didn't she have her own poles at one point?
She did. Yeah, there were Carmen Electra poles.
Yes.
Yes,
but
I do recall Bobby was very much an early adopter of that, and so I think that's why a lot of people, Bobby's style, kind of bled out beyond just Australia, like into like Singapore and further afield, because she created those DVDs.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it has here. Yeah, the first pole studio in Sydney, all in 2004. First Vic studio, 2004. First South Australia studio, also 2004.
Yeah, I think that was Lady Love in South Australia, but
it was, yeah.
I don't know quite as much about that. Carly Hunter would be a good one to ask about that. She worked for Lady Love, I think, before she created the Pole Boutique. Vic was where I was like, I know exactly what's going on because I'm watching it happen in front of my eyes.
Experiencing it.
Whereas what was going on in other states, because I mean, I think it was a similar point when the first Queensland studio came about, but the one that's listed in there, that's Pole Fitness Australia, that
in 2006.
Well, that got listed. I mean, I consulted with Nat Takanawa, who was very much kind of in the early days of Queensland pole, and I classified that as the first pole studio. But before that, I know Lisa D was teaching in a converted gym room with poles in it, I think before then. And that was happening.
Yeah, was that...
I don't know.
That was all around a similar time.
And I think that, that was happening in a few different states. Even Tassie, I think Pole Revolution, I think that it's listed maybe as 2006 was when that opened. But I know that I can't remember the name of the woman who started Pole Revolution, but I think she was teaching for a couple of years out of her garage as well before that happened, like before the official first studio opened. Like it was all kind of happening at the same time. 2004 to 2006 was really like, it was a very underground movement. You know, it definitely wasn't mainstream, but I mean, I remember the daughter of a friend of mine who she must have been probably 16 at the time or something. She got a pole installed in her place. She was definitely nowhere near the sex industry. Like she was just some random 16-year-old who had someone install a pole into her place. And this would have been 2006, 2007, maybe. Like it was just, you know, random people were kind of taking it on, but it was still very underground. It was still very, you know, I want to say risque, but like, you know, if you said to someone that you were doing pole dancing, they would immediately think that you were in the industry. You know, obviously not that there's anything wrong with that coming from the industry, no. But yeah, it would be very much that, like, you know, if you were a primary school teacher or something like that, you wouldn't have told anyone that you were doing pole dancing. Whereas it's definitely morphed into something that's a lot more acceptable in the mainstream and not seen as being, you know, so shameful.
Underground.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I know I started in 2012, and that was a very heavy comment I got in 2012 when you would share that you were a pole dancer. Yep. So I think these days it's converted a lot more to the, oh, you so must be so strong.
Your core must be so
you
strong.
Must.
Yes, it's hilarious. Do you know what I reckon was a huge turning point in that was Australia's Got Talent.
Who was the first person to go on Australia's Got Talent?
I believe it was Joanna Littlewood-Johnson. And then I think the year after that was Susie and Toby. And I don't want to... and there was also Maddie Shields. And I'm not sure. He may have even been before Joe.
You've got on here 2011, Maddie Shields through to the semi-finals on Australia's Got Talent with Indigenous theme pole performance. And then Joanna Littlewood got through in 2013.
There you go. Yeah. So Maddie Shields was first.
There we go.
And I mean, and that was huge at the time. Like for anyone who wasn't in the industry at the time, like it got a lot of coverage. You know, a lot of people were sharing it on like Facebook. There'd be like videos of this Indigenous pole dance, and like everyone sort of knew who he was. And I mean, outside of the industry, I'd be being tagged on Facebook and stuff like that, or sent it.
In all the pole dance, you're the token pole dancer in your group of friends that just gets tagged in everything.
Yeah.
Well, what I love about this timeline too is I'm mostly referring to the timeline because it's a summary of everything that's in and around the book. But what I love is that you listed when Instagram launched, and that was 2010. So to give an idea, I guess, for the people who have been only polling for a very short period of time and who have so much poll information at their fingertips, I could imagine those early days and trying to decipher who were like the first pole studios open would have been really challenging to try to get that like,
well, particularly like it was near impossible to work out who was like teaching pole first in a state, because like I said, people were teaching out of their garage or, you know, things like that. That's why I went for the purpose-built studios. That sort of felt like the easier mark to hit.
Yeah.
But it's because I've known, like I know a bunch of, you know, the OGs from a few of the states. So I knew who to ask. And if someone didn't have an answer to something, they would know who I needed to ask. You know, for example, I didn't know Sam Sudbury, who started Pole Stars, because I learned from one of her instructors. But, you know, obviously I kind of got put onto her to tell the story of Pole Stars, because I knew that like Pole Stars was a big movement back then, even though it wasn't technically a studio. It really deserved a bit of attention in the book because, I mean, they were in New South Wales, they were in Vic, and they were in Queensland, and in the very early days, you know. But I didn't want people like that to get forgotten because they were very early adopters of pole dancing, even though Sam didn't have a history in the sex industry at all. Because like I know Canetta obviously did, Bobby obviously did, I think Nat Takanawa did. There were a bunch of people who came through from the clubs, and that sort of made sense. Like because we all sort of learnt it in the clubs, it was all there for us to kind of utilize it. I guess it sort of made sense for people like that to bring it to more mainstream audience. But to be an early adopter of pole dancing in the day where it wasn't cool, it was very underground, it was very heavily judged and very heavily associated with the sex industry, which I have to say, like, I have been thinking about this a little bit, and I really feel that pole dancing has contributed quite heavily to a certain level of acceptance and embracing of the sex industry. Like a lot of people deserve credit for a lot of different things, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that pole dancing sort of became this middle step between sex industry workers and the general public. There was this sort of like halfway point where a whole bunch,
where it can sort of bring both of them together
a little bit. There's this kind of midpoint step where a whole bunch of people who weren't part of the sex industry still identified with the sex industry roots of their chosen like passion. So I don't know. Yeah. I feel like there's got to be some credit given to mainstream pole dancing in bridging the gap between sex industry and the mainstream.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I like that analogy of it being the center of bringing both these industries together, because I do think, and like some of the conversations we have had, and the one I had with Denny recently about stripping versus pole dancing, is it's definitely, stripping itself is becoming more appreciated than what maybe it was in the past. And I think pole has definitely helped contribute to that, because people, like we just joked before, you get asked, you must be so strong, you must be so this. And so people are wowed by what pole dancing and the sex industry workers can do on this particular apparatus. So yeah, look, I think that's really interesting. And I definitely think pole has done a lot of things just in understanding what the movements are doing. You know, it's obviously brought people out who understand the body, who can now help us understand what we're doing to our body in these movements. People have had to try to teach it and really break the movements down and really understand them. And not to say that wasn't there before. But this is becoming people's primary.
Oh my God, it really was the Wild West of teaching. Like, anything goes.
Just throw yourself into everything.
I mean, and kudos to anyone who was teaching back then and had an understanding of the body or technique at all, because there really wasn't a lot of you around, and I was not one of those people. We were just, we were literally trying to do adult gymnastics. But we were just kind of like adventurous, fun-loving babes, just trying to do shit, and just like other
like, people. That looks cool. Can I do that too?
Totally. No one really understanding that, like, if you do, I know you spoke to Simone a few times, but Simone the pole physio, bringing that kind of level of understanding of the body into what we're actually doing with our body. Oh my God. Back then it was just like, I've seen Janine Butterfly lower her body down, like from an iguana into a plank. I'm going to try that too. It doesn't matter if I like basically tear my bicep off my shoulder. I'm just going to give it a crack. Like it was.
Are you like, the more you understand about your body, are you more terrified by what you were doing back in the day? Like,
I'm, no, you know what? It's just, it is what it is. I'm not the kind of person that has regrets. So I just did what I was doing, and that was fine. I got injured in the process. I am not one of those pole dancers who did not come through unscathed, who came through unscathed. I did not come through unscathed. But that has definitely made me a better teacher now. Like it's really shown me what doing it incorrectly can do. And that I know that has definitely improved my approach to teaching, and putting the fear of God into the students of like, this is what happens when you don't do it right. And if you don't think about your technique and so forth, obviously said with love.
Crazy how like much it's always said with love. And we just don't want, like, I've had a few injuries myself, and I just don't want you to go through that shit too. Like, if I can help you avoid that by sharing my trauma to my body, I will do that.
But here's another, I was going to, before you go on, another really interesting element of the way that the history of pole progressed is how extreme it got really fast, right? So, a lot of people coming into pole dancing now are just like, oh, there's spatchcocks and rainbow Marchenkos and like, people like putting their foot to their head, like in eagles and all this sort of stuff. That obviously, I mean, you would have to understand that did not exist in the early days until, and I'm going to credit Felix Kane, because I really believe it was Felix that was the turning point in creating more, I guess, extreme contortionist pole. Obviously, she didn't create everything, but the spatchcock and the eagle were two of them. And she did this kind of thing called a lunch. We called it a lunchbox back in the day, but it's just basically kind of an iguana scorpion kind of thing.
Like fang thing.
Yes.
Where you can't. Yes, I remember that being called the lunchbox, actually. When you're like the lunchbox, and I'm like,
yes,
I'm really intrigued to know how you label this, like what this move is, because I remember a lunchbox move.
Yes, so she
yes, and then it was the pencil when you were straight, and then you were the lunchbox.
So Felix did that in her routine in 2006 when she won the first time round, and I have a feeling she might have done an upright eagle in that routine as well, and then she did the spatchcock in 2 years later in 2008. When these moves started coming out and people started seeing that, because I mean, strippers in general, like there are strippers with dance backgrounds, of course, but mostly my experience was strippers weren't really contortionists. They might have a little split here and there or something like that, but they were, not really renowned for doing these amazing Cirque du Soleil things on stage. It was really just about kind of your sexy movement. So a lot of the people that came through, I think in the very early days, weren't busting that sort of stuff out because they just didn't have the body capacity for it. And then Felix comes along, and like 3 months into learning pole, she wins Miss Pole Dance Australia. Just wild. But I reckon that really marked the process, going from when an extended butterfly was like the height of what everyone could do, to suddenly creating this landscape where people realized suddenly that anything goes. Like, I think like Felix creating those shapes really made people go, holy shit, like we can do more than just leg hangs and shoulder mounts and extended butterflies. Like this thing could be all sorts of stuff. And back in those days, that's when people, I think, started to look at things like the Malakam videos, the Indian pole videos and the Chinese pole, and started being like, well, what are these people doing with an upright pole, and how can we create that on the pole? And then it became, this whole kind of gymnastic circus sort of vibe started to feed into pole style as well, where you've got all of these amazing tricks started to be created. Like the first time I saw a rainbow Marchenko, I was like, what is this sorcery? Like, how is someone doing that?
How does somebody's body do this? That's really interesting. And I guess like looking at that and looking at that timeline of 2008 where Felix Kane did the spatchcock, and then 2 years later Instagram becomes the thing. And obviously, when did Facebook come out? I think Facebook was before Instagram.
Facebook was like 2006 or something, I think. Or 2007.
So I guess then being able to share that and people get creative and innovative based on what they've seen. So yeah, it's really interesting.
It was a fascinating time to be part of the pole community. Is that like it was an explosion? It was a trick explosion between like 2008 to 2013. And I mean, it's never really stopped. Like there's people have been creating ever since. But so much of the really like fundamental, amazing tricks like your spatchcock or your rainbow Marchenko or something, like things that are really more contortionist tricks on the pole. A lot of that came out of that sort of 5-year period. And yes, like you said, Instagram was revolutionary in people being able to see what other people were doing. Another really interesting element of pole in the early days, in Victoria for sure, because Sydney I think was a bit different, was everyone was a little bit kind of guarded in their syllabus. So like there was only, there might have been like 5 or 6 different studios, and you couldn't really go to other studios to learn. You couldn't fraternize with other studios because everyone would be kind of guarding what they were creating. And then suddenly, like at Miss Pole Victoria, you'd see everything that people had been working on, because like
all these new tricks that have been created and put in curriculums.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that was really interesting. It created there was that vibe for a long time with Victorian pole, in that you could only teach for one studio. You could only really train at one studio. And yeah, it was so interesting. Sydney was a huge inspiration, I think, for Victorian pole dancers when we started to see that they were all just like messing about with each other, and there was none of that sort of competitive vibe at all. I think, I really give credit to Sydney in that, just that open collaboration, because Victoria, I think, eventually got there, but it just took a lot longer.
And I know in Brisbane, like, because we're a much smaller community to start off with, it was definitely, now you see a lot of people training between different studios, but I would still say that loyalty element is still there, like a lot.
I suppose it's human nature as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's similar in probably a lot of industries. Like if you go to a tennis club, you tend to only go to that same tennis club, or I don't know. I don't know anything about tennis, really.
And let's be real, sometimes pole can be expensive too. So it's like, why get the most out of the one membership over here rather than trying to have multiple memberships?
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess a lot happened from like 2011 to 2016. Would you say that was really like the building of the actual proper, I don't think proper is the right word, but like the building of the industry?
That was like the growth period of the industry. So the early days, I would say that the building was done in the early days. The foundations were all laid. And then that middle period where a lot of stuff was going on was like the industry had grown to an extent that suddenly there were enough minds and enough personalities within the industry then who all wanted to kind of make stuff happen and like create more competitions and and like open more studios and do all sorts of experimenting with what pole can kind of be. Like that was only because it had sort of that groundswell had led to the point. You can't even see my hands. I'm very Italian with my hands, and my hands are down here. You can't see what I'm doing. But anyway, there was a lot of this creation that happened in the early days, and then during that period of 2011 to 2015ish, it was suddenly like we've got all of these people wanting to like put on different competitions and shows and showcases and you know different styles of performing. Like pole comedy did not exist before pole theatre, really. I mean, gosh, I'm going to get slammed for saying that because Carly Hunter did her Granny Clementine routine for APC, or the Australian Capital Pole,
in 2000. Yeah, in 2012.
So,
because did pole comedy start with pole
well,
theatre?
Technically, as a category, yes, it did.
Yeah, as a theme.
So I mean, Carly's Granny Clementine was definitely a very early adopter of that style. But I mean, you could take it back to even in the earlier days with Susie Q's doll performance at MPDA. I think it was 2007 when she did like the doll, and she had like pole dancing for dummies, their book Pole Dancing for Dummies, and then she'd like spray I mean, Susie Q, an amazing showgirl, and she has always kind of brought a little bit of that fun frivolity into her themes and her performances. But I would say Carly Hunter stands out in my mind as one of the very early adopters of like specifically creating a show around the comedy theme.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think because like I said, I started in 2012. So I started as this growth was happening. And like, so I felt within my first couple of years, so much had changed. And like in Queensland, we only had 2 competitions, Miss Pole Dance and QPC. And then you obviously had the heats from that. And I would say Queensland's probably only the last couple of years sort of leveled that up again and is continuing to grow. But some of those other, like New South Wales exploded in competitions in the early.
Absolutely.
Is it tens? Is that what you call that? Like
the 2010s, like yeah.
2010s, yeah. When you say tens, it just sounds so weird. But yeah, there was so much that happened in that. And I think like when I look at this, there were so many of what you would say pole idols now getting their first wins and getting their first.
This is another thing that's been really interesting to watch throughout the years. Like I remember, I believe I was there for Miss Philly's first competition, I believe, for her first Miss Pole Vic. In fact, I definitely was, because I saw her win Unleashed, which was the Pole Divas competition. I had gone to Unleashed, and then I saw her compete a few months or a year later or whatever in Miss Pole Vic. And you know, she is consistent, and she is an absolute machine. And she went year after year after year. She would be doing comps. And you know, you look at her now, she's an absolute beast. But anyone who like has come onto the scene maybe in the last year or 2 years or whatever and lays eyes on Philly and just they're like, you know, how is this even a human? But like, and she was always
probably the best way to explain Philly. How is she even human?
But you know, I like having seen her like work her butt off to become so refined in her style. Like, it's really interesting. I mean, and that's happened with a lot of people. Like, you know, Gracie. Gosh, I remember Gracie's first competition, and oh my God, Beth Finlay. You know, Bethany's first competition. Yeah, in fact, Gracie and Beth. I think it was the same night. It was Miss Pole Vic 2011, and Bethany Finlay. Oh my God, I will never forget it. She pulled out a starfish. You know, when you stand on the pole and put your body. She did that in heels. In fucking heels.
What? I don't know that I've ever seen that. I feel like I need to go back and Google this.
I don't even know if it was recorded. Like, it was wild. It blew my mind.
Wow.
And Bethany has blown my mind every year ever since. But, you know, she's always been super fearless, but like obviously become much more refined over time. It's the same with Gracie. Like, you could see that she was a real show, like, a real show person. Like right from the start, her very first routine, I think it was this schoolgirl kind of theme from memory. And, you know, she really had that stage presence and everything. But again, she was still like this baby Polar. And then suddenly, you know, she blossomed and just became this like incredible, like absolute performance machine. And, you know, having watched all of these incredible stars, and I think I do have regrets that I didn't make it to pole icon, I have to say. But, oh
it was
God, I
epic,
can imagine.
but yes,
But yeah, people who see all of these amazing performers now, you know, like I would really recommend you try and dig up some old videos of them as like not baby, they weren't baby polars exactly, but like in the very early days of their competing. Like it's so interesting seeing how they've grown and like grown into their styles as performers.
I remember watching Blood, Sweat and Sequence back in the days because I just started, and I remember watching that and just being so amazed by. And Philly was in that. I'm pretty sure it was Cleo.
Yeah,
the Hurricane was Jeddah in that one. I know Shel Hefner was.
But I think they had Felix in that one.
Yeah, like that. The only copy I've been told that you can find is the really dodgy one on YouTube. If anybody is
definitely worth. It was well done. It was a really well done doco, and Philly's journey through that was great. Was it Lou Landers? Was Lou Landers
she had
in
it was
that one? Yes.
Yeah, I feel like it was somebody's requested that I do a Blood, Sweat and Sequence reunion podcast episode. Yes. Try to get everybody on the podcast or speak to everybody about it.
Do a watch party. That would be so great.
Yes. That would be so. I'm like, I need to write down these ideas. I'm like, I have no idea if any of these people listen, but maybe you will hear from me and maybe we will try to do a Blood, Sweat and Sequence
reunion episode. I'd be so listening to that one.
That would be, and like most of them are still in pole. They're all still in pole actually, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I don't think anybody's really dropped off. So what do you think, like, I mean, a lot has happened. What do you think some of the highlights have been for our industry?
Well, where do I start? I think that there's two ways to answer it because there are these amazing milestones that have happened, like as far as, you know, different performances done by different performers or different competitions. Like pole theatre was revolutionary when it came about. I love the fact that they started pole theatre. You know, like the pole cruise was amazing that, you know, that Jem got that off the ground. Like that's incredible. But I think that the thing that I find the most groundbreaking in pole dancing is what it's brought to women and the women who do it. And I'm going to say, you know, obviously we embrace people of all genders, but really when it comes down to it, it has been, and I hate the word empowerment. I feel it's really kind of a bit naff, but it is that, like the beauty of pole dancing in how it shows women their inner strength and their power, and then marries that with their, you know, raw sexual energy. And like, it's just like, it makes people feel like absolute goddesses. And I think that that's what I think brought it out from the clubs, because working in the clubs, that is this feeling that you get. Like you get this feeling of being like an absolute goddess and being so powerful and so honored. And I mean, yes, obviously there's always been this stigma, but I would challenge you to find any stripper who's worked in the industry who has not experienced being on stage and feeling like they're just an absolute superhero. And I think that's what pole has brought to so many women. And also being able to connect in a community with other women who are going, and other people in general who are going through that same experience. So I'm going to say that would be the biggest highlight for me, is what it has brought to women like across the world.
I like, and you can see me here the whole time, like, yeah, Yeah, like I agree. And I mean, that is why I'm here and that is why I stayed. But it builds trust with yourself, which I just don't think that any other, like, I think other sports do help do that. But I don't necessarily feel like when you come into pole as an adult and you do pole, you don't have to do competition. There is no competitive element if you choose not to have
Totally.
a competitive element. You can
You
just
can
come
make
in
it what you
and
want.
dance,
Yeah,
feel
totally.
yourself. Yeah. And I agree. I think that is probably one of the most interesting things about pole. And when people talk to, and when you get that question, like we joked about before, like, oh, I bet you're super strong and you're super this. It's like, I'm actually super confident and I actually trust
Yeah,
myself and believe in myself.
yeah,
And that's what I get from pole. The fitness stuff is okay. Like it's pretty good, but like, yeah, it comes down to that connection with oneself, which I just don't think any other mainstream sport has
I
been able
agree.
to achieve. And I wouldn't say pole is mainstream yet.
I
So
agree.
yeah,
There's
like
something really
I just don't
magical
think
about
anything
it.
else has
It's just,
done it.
it is incredible. You know, I did once, I was going to do it. I was thinking about it, like doing a series of articles on different industries, like kind of underground activities like pole dancing. And I was trying to think of other things that kind of had similar elements. The only one that I could come up with was roller derby. I was thinking roller derby is a little bit similar in that you know these women like they find that connection and that community together, and they find that sort of beastly power as well. But that what roller derby. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to go back on what I was about to say because roller derby's got that real kind of sexy vibe to it as well. Like I know that in their history, they would like
It does,
wear
yeah.
fishnets and like, I don't know, kind of get in touch with their sexual power as well. So I don't know, maybe there's some good parallels with roller derby, but nothing else I can think of.
It's funny you bring that up. There is an article that exists. I definitely have it, so I'll send it through to you. That talks about pole and like what we get out of it, like similar conversation to this, and roller derby. And I think the only other one they brought up was belly dancing. I think, but I might be wrong. I'll have to dig out that article
Yeah.
and share it with you because it was about what is so. I feel like that I went through a phase of just like, especially when I was at uni, Googling like putting pole dancing into the library just to see what would come up. And it was an article I found through that. And, but I read a lot of things at that point in time. So a few might be, mishmashed
Yes.
in my brain, but it was all about the sexual element and the being together with
Yeah.
other females and creating something with them. Where do you think our industry is going?
I mean, that's a great question.
That's the good old,
Where,
yeah.
where is the world going? Who knows? Like there's a very broad
Well,
question
yeah.
at the moment. I feel like it's so interesting over the last couple of years how a lot of us have gone online, and so we have been forced to disconnect from each other a little bit, and I wonder how that has affected the industry as a whole, because I know that people always crave that connection, and I know that we've come back to our studios a lot more recently, especially down in Victoria. So I'm Victorian based, so we had a lot of time outside of our studios. But well, I suppose when you look at the rebound, I mean, everyone just wants to be back and connected again. Um, but I do think that the pandemic encouraged a lot of people to get home poles and to
Yeah.
get their setup for their training at home. I do think that there is a bit more of that in our future. Like I think realistically, training several times a week, you've got to train several times a week if you want to become an advanced polar, but that's not reasonable for like financial reasons or for geographical reasons or whatever for people to always visit a studio. So I think that there's going to be probably more growth outside of the studios. I mean, if I can talk about just for a second, it's really interesting because when I started Polesphere, the it was maybe 5% of the pole community were doing pole remotely, like were looking for virtual classes or doing tutorials and stuff like that. Like, obviously people were still looking at Instagram and they were doing sort of self-teaching that way, but as far as doing pole tutorial platforms and things like that, it was really the minority. And I think that exploded a lot the last few years. And I think that energy has remained. Like, I think a lot of people are much more open to training from instructors that are overseas on Zoom, and so in some ways it's almost brought us even closer together with our overseas counterparts. Like you sort of, it's more accessible to be like, I love that, I want to learn from Doris Arnold. So, if she's doing a Zoom thing, then I'm going to jump on that. Or, I want to learn from, whoever, some like Asian pole dancer or South American pole dancer or whatever. And you can kind of be a bit like, yeah, let's just Zoom it. This is sort of how we function. But
I think that is one of the best things that came out of COVID is that not everybody, but a large majority of the population learned how to use technology. So we have opened up so many more doors to what we maybe would have had. And even like a really good example of that is I do my physio with Simone, who is in Melbourne and I am in Brisbane. And I remember just thinking that first one, I'm like, I'm a little bit apprehensive about this because what I traditionally know to be physio is very hands-on, but it doesn't need to be. So it has challenged the way we think and the way we operate. And I think a lot more people are wanting to complement, coming back to just using this as an example, are wanting to complement their training outside of the studio, but they don't know how to do it. There's still that gap of what they're learning. They don't know how to put that into their own outside training without just replicating the exact same thing they do in class. And they can't do that sometimes because it's a lot to take in. So
if I can make a comment on where I would like to see the industry go more.
Go do it.
So
I'm excited.
We are so competition focused as an industry. And my personal passion is like performance and showcase. So, obviously that, like, I put on a few showcases in Melbourne because I wanted to see more of that. And that's not something that I'm not sure that I would ever do that again because it's a lot of work. But I would love to see the industry moving away a little bit more from competition and more towards showcases, because I really feel like our roots are literally in performing, not in competing, I feel like there's something so beautiful about the experience of getting on stage without trying to measure up against other people. I mean, gosh, if you really come down to it, yes, a strip club is very competitive in its own way, but but not in the same way that you don't have people with like scorecards and criteria and all of that sort of stuff. Like the beauty of just performing for the sake of performing. I really want to see that coming back a bit stronger. Like, I know people really still try and put on showcases, and I know a lot of studios do their in-house showcases and whatever, but I would love to see big, pole icon style, but showcases, without feeling like, I don't know, this is my passion.
I agree with what you're saying. And I think the biggest, from what the people I've spoken to when they put on showcases, is like, it's a lot of work and the return on investment is quite low. And it's actually almost harder 100%. To run.
I can speak from personal experience.
People like the competition.
I can speak from personal experience. People will much prefer to pay to go to a competition as a spectator. And I theorized a number of reasons why that was the case. But my ethos when I put on, in Melbourne, I put on Pandemonium events, which is just a bunch of showcases of variety nights. And I wanted to pay everyone. Like I wanted to just like create performance opportunities for people. And so, and I did, but I didn't really make any money from it. And it was a lot of work, which is an understatement. Yes. It was a lot of work. And so, yeah, I would love to see somehow maybe studios getting behind bigger showcases a bit more, like rather than, I don't know, or I don't even know what the answer is. This is my vision. Like I would love for larger scale pole performance variety night showcases to be a thing as opposed to a whole lot of competitions.
And I do think a lot of people feel that when they're going through their pole journey, they get to this point when they're probably advanced and they're like, okay, do I become an instructor or do I go and compete? Like, it's almost like do I just continue to challenge myself and have fun? And it feels like you getting to advanced is a milestone. And then your next milestone might be instructor. And then your next one's going to be competition. But it feels like they're almost milestones within our pole journeys, but they don't need to be everybody's milestones.
For sure. And I know, I guess it just depends on the studio that you come from and what their focus tends to be. Because some studios are more competition focused than others. I agree with that, but I just feel like it would be so great if there was more performance opportunities for your low level pole dancers, just to do group stuff and anyway, I would hope that we start to embrace that a little bit more on a national level.
We'll have to listen back to this episode in a few years' time.
See what happened.
And see what's changed. Yeah.
Unfortunately, knowing the industry, I very much doubt it. Like it would take some pretty big, I want to say big dogs. It would take the big fish to be like, this is what we are going to do and just run with it. Like it's harder, I think, for, the little people with a dream to just put these things on, because you kind of really need studios to get behind you and push you and stuff.
It's almost like you think about influencers, you almost need influencers to back these types of experiences just to get the word out there that they exist and how good they are for the industry, because they've got trust with their audiences. So, I do have a question. Do you know if Fornia Canada or Bobby was the first one to start teaching pole?
Fornia was, it was mid-90s.
It was Fornia.
I think Fornia in Vegas from what I know Fornia is Canadian, but I think when she started, it was, hello, puppy dog.
Yeah, this is my little Artemis. He's just waking up from
beautiful. A nap. Fornia started teaching,
very fluffy,
from what I know, in the mid-90s, and I believe it was in Vegas. Bobby was definitely, a little bit later than that.
Yeah, because like a lot of people I've spoken to, that's one thing that I couldn't get confirmed on. Like that was just that was something that was still always up in the air, and a question mark I definitely had when it came to the history of pole and where
Fornia
it actually first
she is
started
recognized as like the mother of pole instruction.
Pole dance. Wow, that's crazy. What a journey we've been on.
And I that's what I mean. The reason why I created the book was because I didn't want to lose a lot of these stories, because it has been such an incredible time to be alive. It's been an incredible journey to witness, and all of these incredible people who have created our history. They're just they're going through it, and they've been on that ride. But so many people coming after them don't know where they've come from and it's not easily accessible to find that information and to see, especially the early days stuff.
And even just Googling something about pole dancing, you just get so many mixed messages anyway, like especially the early days, that it's hard to know if what you're reading is true
Well, that's true.
and legitimate.
And I'll tell you a story about that.
So I think
actually, not long ago, I mean, it would have been, okay, well, not long in the scheme of things, 2 years, maybe 3 years. I saw there was a video going around. I'm pretty sure it was on YouTube, and it was like, I think it was credited as one of the first, if not the first, pole dance routine ever recorded on a video. Now, let me set you the scene. It was in, I reckon, the 70s. It was either late 60s, early 70s, maybe. It was in color, but you could tell it was very, like, you know, really back in the day. It was, I believe, an African-American woman and some crooner guy just singing, like, I don't know, some like lounge singer. And this woman was doing actually really incredible things on the pole. And I mean, you know, like really climbing right up there, doing inverts up the pole. I can't even tell you what she was doing, but I do remember the impression was, wow, this trick, I didn't realize this trick existed so long ago. And it was literally in the 70s. Anyway, so fast forward to me preparing for this interview, and I wanted to find it. I really wanted to find that so I could give you the links to watch it, because it was actually quite an amazing video to see. Do you think I could find it? I mean, it's impossible. It's literally impossible. You can't Google this stuff now, and it probably is somewhere on the internet still. I know.
But there's so many other things that just pop up on that Google search.
Anything that involves the word pole dancing, and you've got like, you know, 3 million hits. But I know Natasha Wang, I think, was who posted it. I remember her making a comment on it. But well, if anyone knows where it exists, maybe she does. But yeah, it is impossible. Well,
we want to see this video.
But I think that my basic point is, finding old stuff is like, you really got to know what you were looking for. Like another little story, and a little vignette. The first time I ever saw a deadlift, like a deadlift into an Aisha, it was done by this pole dancer. Her performing name was Joy, I believe. And I can't remember her real name. Lisa always remembers her real name, but this was 2007 or something like that. And it was a YouTube video, and it was just of her doing some stuff in the club, you know, like on stage in a club. And she just like, you know, she goes into, I believe it was a twisty grip, but it might have been like a cup grip or something like that, and just pulls, and her whole body just floats up into this Aisha.
Oh my God.
And all of us who saw that lost our fucking minds. We're like,
I could imagine in 2007, like, that would have been unreal to see.
There is absolutely no way. If I was to try and find that video now, there is no way, even though it probably somewhere in the depths of YouTube, it probably still exists. But there's things like that. It's like we need to record it and get things down while we can, because they will be lost.
Yeah. And especially like the industry is still, what was the first date on this timeline of, and this is for Australia, 2002. So 20 years since Bobby started teaching in King's Cross clubs. It is still such a young industry. So trying to document as much of it as possible. And I love that when you've done this, you've included things like Michelle Shimmy starts the hashtag Sunday Bum Day.
Like, it's such a thing. You don't want to lose that information, because also Shimmy herself will forget what year that happened. Like, I really had to press her at the time. Like, I think she struggled to remember what year it was, and she had to kind of be like, oh, it was in relation to pole theatre was already in existence, so it must have been at this point. And the PD hashtag, that was a game changer.
Yes.
The PD hashtag. People coming into the industry now, people would just assume like, oh, well, that's probably just always existed. No, back in those days, like if you wanted to, if you wanted to look up on a hashtag, I don't know, invert or something like that.
Yeah, God, you could get so many things.
The PD hashtag was like a game changer.
It was a game. I remember like that first coming out, and we were just like, whoa. Mind blown. Like we could actually search these things now. I don't even think I had Instagram at the time, but like it definitely comes across and you start to learn about it. And I think like I would love to compare the Australian history at some point to, let's say, the American history, because I feel like we have so many, and it's probably just because I'm very immersed in the Australian industry. We've just got so many entrepreneurs. We have so many starters. We have so many people who are taking things like Michelle Shimmy and like, I'm going to do this hashtag PD such and such. Like, I feel like Australians have done so much of that, and I'm sure other countries have also contributed.
We have punched above our weight. We have definitely punched above our weight, yeah.
Oh, have we?
As far as,
the Aussies.
as far as the early adopters of pole, I mean, it definitely was in the States before us, but it became bigger earlier here, I believe, from what I can tell. Maybe because we're a smaller country and it sort of word spread a little bit faster or something. I don't know what the reason was, but we were definitely a front runner in the industry by comparison to other countries. And for our size, we definitely have punched above our weight in the overall industry. But I would love to know a bit more history behind, the US pole history and stuff.
I'll have to find
Janine
somebody.
Butterfly would be a good one to ask because she was very early days.
Oh, yes.
She, right around the time when Felix won the Worlds, I think she won the US Pole Dance Federation, the US PDF, one of the first biggest competitions over there. And then she, I believe, came second in the Worlds when Felix came first. Janine was sort of running side to side with Felix. Felix sort of tended to pip her at the post, whatever the saying is. Felix would sort of take first very regularly, but Janine's performing was so stunning and so beautiful. But she was very much right there in the early days, so she would have a lot of stories to tell.
Yeah, I have to reach out. I have to
slide
into her DMs and see.
I'd love to watch that.
I'll do my best, guys. I do my best. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us, so fun. With me today.
It's my passion. I like, it's so great. So I'm honoured to be part of this industry and to have been able to see it sort of grow and flourish through the years. So it's super fun to just be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think I could imagine you probably learned so much about the industry when you guys started the magazine. Like you already probably were learning, but like when you started talking to people through the magazine and then creating this, it probably is like the experience I have on this podcast. A lot.
Yeah.
And the amount of information, new things I learn is really great. And it's so good to connect with other people.
Absolutely.
100%. Is there anything you want to share before we jump off today?
Nothing that comes to mind. No, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. Excellent. And I appreciate you having me on to chat about it.
No, that's okay. And if people want to find you, where can they find you? Instagram?
Yes, my Instagram is Kitty Cat Ally. That's KittyCatAlly. I don't really post a lot of content on my wall there these days. I spend a lot of time behind the scenes with Pulsephere. So if you want to know where I'm at, you'll find me very easily through Pulsephere.
Pulsephere is there?
Yeah, my Instagram these days is mostly about the stories. I have had a bit of an extended break of aerial pole because of a health issue. So I feel like I will document my return to aerial as it happens. But yeah, my Instagram definitely doesn't reflect very much content these days, but Pulsephere does.
That's okay though. I think we need to take those breaks obviously to look after our health and And it'll be good to see when you do decide to get back into it, to see it documented.
It is very
and
humbling.
even for yourself to see.
I'm already on the journey, and I tell you what, inside leg hang is so painful to relearn it after a couple of years off.
You had the technique, it's all in your brain, and like you're strong enough, but as soon as you wrap that leg around the pole, it's just like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
Why am I here?
Yes. Yeah, getting back after a break.
Well, thank you so much for it's hard. How long was the break?
Good couple of years. I mean, not totally a break as in I was still dancing. I was still doing dance classes, but actually going up the pole was probably a good 2-year break. So, yeah, I think you've done an episode on coming back after a break, haven't you?
Yeah, we've done an episode on coming back after a break, and we've also done the your success does not equal your level, which touches on the break stuff as well. So, yeah, I'll have to I'll reshare them. I think we're at that point now that we've got a few gems in the archives that potentially get missed depending on where people are starting their listening journey with us. So, yeah, it's one thing I do want to start doing is resharing old episodes because, God, there are some gems that exist and there are some not so good gems that exist. But that's okay. Absolutely. It's all about the journey.
We'll share those ones in the show notes.
Yes, they're in the show notes. Thank you, show notes. And also, if you guys are interested in PulseSphere, I'll share a link for PulseSphere as well to get a bit of a discount and a 10-day free trial. So I'm absolutely loving it, and I'm loving the partnership with PulseSphere. It's been really great. So and learning a lot through the platform. So guys, check that out if you're interested. And thank you for listening today, team. I've enjoyed uncovering the history of Australian pole dance with Ally. I think you guys I think you would have got a lot out of today's episode. So thank you for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you soon.
Bye.